Hello, Renaissance students. Today we are going to begin our final chapter of our portrait session for year 2. What I thought would be very interesting and most helpful to everyone was to teach you how to do a self-portrait. Self-portraits are a fabulous way to just practice your skills. Your model is never late, and it's not difficult to find your model as well. Sometimes it's when you want to work from life, it's hard to find someone who'll sit for you, who can give up their time and whatever. So Rembrandt was the father of the self-portrait, and we're going to look to him. And I'm going to do a portrait today in the tradition of Rembrandt's darker backgrounds and using his chiaroscuro lighting and so forth. So we're going to jump in, and this will be a 3-part lesson. Today, I'm going to show you the first step that you'll need in laying the foundations. Now, what you see behind me here is a mirror. So I have a secondary easel here. You could push your easel to the wall and set the mirror up on a wall. That's one way to do it. I like to have my mirror a little bit angled to my easel so that I can look at it and I'll get sort of a 3/4 angle of my face. Right behind me here, I have 2 lights actually. One of the bulbs is very cool and one of the bulbs is very warm. One's kind of a daylight and it just casts too much of a cool cast on my face. And the other part was just too warm and wasn't giving me enough contrast with the warm light and the shadows. Everything was warm and it just didn't look good. So I have sort of a balance of cool and warm light. You could open a window or whatever. I have blocked off all the windows in my studio so I could control the lighting and work as long as I want to with my controlled lighting. So I have that set up. I've got a very large canvas here today. This is a linen and I'm going to be working on this. I thought it'd be kind of interesting and sort of fun. And then for colors today, I have my palette. I'm just going to be using burnt sienna and ultramarine blue and yellow ochre. I'm just going to lay in, I'm going to darken the whole canvas with my regular tone, wipe it down so I have that neutral tone. Now, because it's a self-portrait, I won't be able to talk while I'm painting, so I will be doing a voiceover over this entire lesson. All right, so let's jump in. Born in 1606, Rembrandt has hundreds of self-portraits credited to him. He is a master at capturing emotion, and he was just so good at really conveying an inner strength and inner depth to his characters. Strongly encourage you to take a look at more of his work. To begin this self-portrait, I start with toning my canvas with a little burnt sienna and yellow ochre. As I get towards the bottom, I incorporate a little bit more ultramarine blue into this initial wash. And of course it is darker, and then I wipe it down, making it a little bit lighter. I like this color as a base, especially for portraits, because it pretty much echoes really any skin tone. You can let some of it show through. And I also like it because I'm going to be working this first step today on just capturing the overall design and layout onto my canvas. And I will be doing where I wipe out the highlights and so forth. So that is as far as I'm taking it today. Laying in size and placement, getting the accuracy down, and then just getting the rest of the form in place. I won't be spending a lot of time on my hand and the palette, but I will be doing that off camera. And you'll get to see some more of the finishing touches as we go through this 3-part course. So the first thing I do here is I begin by establishing I want the head about that high away from the edge of the canvas. And I start to lay in some marks indicating if my head is there, the palette should be roughly this far away. As I'm working along here, I discovered that things just aren't working. The head was too big, it wasn't in the right place, so I wipe it all down. And I want to encourage you to start over as many times as you feel you need to. There's no right or wrong, and oil paintings are very forgiving. So again, I make some marks. I make the head a little bit smaller because I need to be able to fit in the rest of my form, because the palette and my hand with the brush is going to be what tells a story. As you can see there in the mirror as I'm working, I like the look of the palette right there. So again, just laying in the proper placement for my face in that area is my first step. Once I get the major components of the painting in place, and I feel that the size and scale of the head are appropriate to the remainder of the canvas and the location of the hand and palette where I've placed them, I can begin to sculpt out the face out of the canvas. So to begin my sculpture, as it were, I start out with my darkest value, which is my furthest eye socket. And so imagining that the surface of my canvas were a lump of clay, I start out with the eyes and just that eye socket back there. Squinting down at myself, I'm looking at the shape of the shadow that eye socket creates. There's a small triangle of light in that area, and I'm leaving that just that neutral tone of the canvas. But the first step is to get the relationship from the eye to the nose accurate, that triangle within the eyes and the nose. The base of the nose has a shadow, and that whole side of the face also has a shadow. So here's a little bit of my scene that I'm looking at. You can see some of the angle of my nose there. The difficult thing about painting a self-portrait is that, try as you might, you're not going to hold still. So every time you look back at the mirror, you have to get yourself adjusted to where your initial perspective was. So I don't show myself in the mirror often. Well, really that's the only time here in this video, because it will look always different. And so every time I look back, there's that slight adjustment that I make. So I've got the eye socket in place. I started to wipe out the value on the forehead and the bridge of the nose, also wanting to get some of the angle of the forehead proper in there too. I'm just kind of establishing that whole dark mass in there. I'm going to want to connect all of my shadows on that side of the face and keep them as clean and as simple as one plane as possible. Every now and then I will wipe out a little bit of the tone on the canvas just to help establish there's a plane change here. It's not as light as that value is going to end up being, but it's just helping me mentally as I sculpt along in this painting that there's going to be a light mass here, and I want to just take that into my cognizant thought process that that's going to be a lighter area. As I'm working to get the relationship correct between the two eyes and the nose and the mouth, I'm also recalling from the very first lessons in the first year the rules that we use in developing accuracy in our drawings, from measuring. I'm dropping imaginary helper plumb lines vertically on the face. I'm seeing where the eye connects with the nose and the mouth as I drop those lines down. And I'm also sort of mentally visualizing how far apart the eyes are. You get to a point in your painting abilities to where you don't need to hold your brush up and measure so much anymore. It's always a good idea to every once in a while, but as you can learn to train and develop your eye to see shapes, distances, and values more accurately, the more fluent you'll get at composing your paintings. Again, just dropping my brush down from the eye to the mouth to see where those two line up. Something I'm just was working on there a little bit, but the eye, of course, is nowhere near finished, but I'm just laying in sort of the general idea of where it's going to sit inside that eye socket. And then the brow bone, as it picks up a little bit of that highlight right there where the eyebrow turns, I'm just establishing the shape of that ocular cavity. Now, the easiest way to paint a forehead is to think about it in three planes. You have the frontal plane that is on the same plane as the bridge of your nose. Then you have the side plane, in this case, the plane that is receiving the light. And then you have the shadow plane. So there's really three basic planes to think of when you're painting the forehead. Same with the cheek, the nose, just if you can think about them as shaving strong, solid blocks of clay, and then with very little alterations in the highlights and shadows, just keep it clean and simple. You'll see as I work along here, when I'm painting in hair, I think about it in terms of a bulky mass. I'm looking at it when I'm squinting into the mirror. Where the darkest shadows are is they frame my face, and as curls tuck under, they're not receiving any light, so those are my darkest shapes. And then the rest is mostly middle tone with a few highlights that I pull out. So when you're squinting down at yourself, don't think about hair as strands or even a specific style. Just squint down and see the bulky mass it in, tuck in shadows, and pull out highlights.
As I begin laying in the anatomy for the neck, I give myself a few directional brush strokes to identify the sternocleidomastoid and just the other muscles and esophagus and the neck, so that I have sort of a visual of where these anatomical features are going to be sitting. And as also how the hair creates shadows around the neck. Try to think of the neck as more a part of the background rather than the foreground. And in doing that, it will have a sense of receding behind the face. Make sure not to put any highlight on the neck that is as bright as the face, because our brain has the idea that it is then on the same plane. So if you put a highlight on the neck as bright as the cheekbone, we will automatically assume it's sticking out as far as the cheekbone. I find that the top of the head is always a nice place to lose edges and just lose them right to the background. Creates a feeling of roundness and form going back into shadow. So I do like to lose edges anywhere and as often as I can. Now that most of the mass is sort of bulked in, I'll come back through with a little bit smaller brush and a little bit slower actions, and I'll start to really sort of define the form and shape a little bit better now. Kind of cleaning up things, maybe checking measurements a little more, making sure my values read a little bit more accurately. And so that is what is happening at this point. I'm just kind of tightening things up, and then I'll work a little further down and around the painting. It's important to me personally in this painting that I have my hand and a palette in the lower portion. I think it creates a story, which I always enjoy in a painting. So I do want to paint that in there. I probably won't show too much of that in the course of these 3 videos since I really want to focus primarily on keeping it in the context of a portrait. But you'll get to see how I work through some of the challenges of making all of that work together. Now I'm coming back through with a very small brush and I'm trying to get the values as accurate as I can. So the Highlights, I am cleaning up and refining the shape of those highlighted passages. I also want to establish my most dominant highlights, and as they recede down the face and they diminish in intensity. So I want to play with some of those aspects in sculpting out the highlights as well. As I'm working around the eye, I'm cognizant of the ocular cavity and how the flesh forms around the eyeball as I'm painting it. Right up there by the crest of the eyebrow where the ocular turns, there's a highlight there, and then right below the eyeball, right as that eyelid comes up to the roundest part of the eye, the furthest out, there's a highlight there too. So the skin, you just have to be aware of how the skin wraps around that area, as well as the nose. When you have the light coming from the upper side plane, it's going to hit the bone of the nose first, and then as it comes across the bridge of the nose, it softens and turns into shadow. And as it comes on the side of the plane of the nose, it reduces in intensity. And again, as hair up there on the forehead, as we just talked about planes of the forehead, another plane to consider is where the hair meets the skin of the forehead. There is a shift in the plane as the head turns and goes back. And so I always take and add a softer connection there where the hair meets the face, because I want to create the illusion of the skull turning and going back under the hair. Now, at the base of the ocular cavity, the zygomatic bone reaches an end. The cheekbone comes to an end about the middle of our eyeball. And so sometimes we think the cheekbone is a bigger area, but it's not. It comes there. And so you'll find in older faces, the collagen has reduced under the skin there. You have to be aware of, as our skin ages, what are the changes that are made in our flesh. So be aware of where that zygomatic bone is under the eye and what is happening to the flesh in between the nose and the cheekbone. There are tiny, subtle plane shifts in the nose. At the end of the nose, right under the ball of the nose, there's a set of planes that form a V, and then that's under the ball of the nose. Underneath that V, it tucks up under a little bit. That's just on my nose. Everybody's nose is a little bit different, but structurally there is a basic anatomy to a nose. As the upper lip and the passage under the nose comes up into the nose, it typically picks up some light depending on the angle of the light, but right under the nostril, there's a little spot of highlight there that just gives you a sense of form as you're working through the nose passages. When you're painting the mouth, be very careful to not make it too dark and keep all of your edges soft. It doesn't matter if you lip lined your lips, when you paint them, if you don't want to look too makeup-y, keep your edges soft and they will have the illusion of being softer, fleshy lips. But if you keep them lined in sharp, strong lines, they'll have a cutout and aged look. So watch out for that, and also watch out for that crease along the nostril as it comes down to the mouth. Often we see that, but if you really focus on it and paint it as dark as you look at it, it will also age you. So you have to be careful not to make that crease too dark. You also want to keep your jawline soft. My jawline here was not in the accurate place. It was a little too short, so and feeling pinched. I had to open it up a little and bring it down some more. And it also needed to be softer feeling, and that gives it a more fleshy, rounded feeling to the jaw. If you keep a sharp line on something, again, it creates the illusion of flatness. So keep it soft and rounded. Really, there's almost nothing on the face short of the bridge of the nose bone that deserves a sharp edge. Almost everything else is soft and rounded. Now I'm adding just a few highlights with a little bit of white paint as I'm going along, just to confirm some value areas and passages where I want it maybe not as intensely white, but a little bit more opaque. And so I'm just kind of using a little white here and there to help tell my story a little bit. Of course, the sparkles in the eyes help it come to life, which gives it a sense of feeling closer towards the finish line. And that's as far as we go this week.